Good morning, everyone. It's Lee Henson, President, Founder of AgileDad, and it's time for today's episode of the Daily Stand-Up. So without any further ado, let's get started. It's Monday. It's time for a brand new week. I hope that you had an amazing weekend. I hope that you had some fun and got some energy out and did something that really uplifted and enlightened you. We want to kick Monday off with something really interesting. We've been spending a lot of time talking about product management and about product ownership and about product ideas and how things flow through systems over the past several episodes. Today, I wanted to talk to you once again about the concept that people probably struggle the most with when it comes to product ownership. And that answer is, drum roll, saying no. For whatever reason, people still struggle to say no. So I thought I'd throw out some ideas on how to say no gracefully to ideas and give you some examples so that you can kind of run with it, because I'll admit I was recently schooled by one of my students, so let me explain. So I had a student who attended one of my recent advanced classes, and we were having a conversation about product ideas. And, we all come up with the stories about Toyota or we come up with stories about Apple with the iPhone. And there's so many ideas that people throw out there. And one of my students said, well, at least you didn't drop the F-bomb. Now, for me, I was like, the F-bomb? And he says, yeah, Ford. And I was like, okay, share more. And there's this concept about, we need a faster horse, we need a faster horse, we need a faster horse. No, we need a car, right? And that was where, Ford stepped in and saved the day and made a car. But what would you do if I told you research shows that that's not actually what happened? So this is interesting because this is changing the way I view that story and changing the way fundamentally that I view product ideas. So what really happened? Here we go. The people never said they wanted a faster horse. This is what's interesting. The people wanted a cheaper horse. The truth is, the horse was plenty fast. The horse was plenty reliable. In fact, the horse was probably more reliable than any other car that we could purchase, right? But what people wanted, and what most people don't realize, is in the early 1900s or in the 1900s in general, having a horse and maintaining a horse and housing a horse and feeding a horse, that costs a lot of money. So I did some research and I came up with a number. I don't know how accurate this number is, but it's probably pretty close. It costs, now picture this is in the 1900s, about $2,200 a year to maintain a horse. Somewhere in that range, $2,196, somewhere in that range. So it cost roughly $2,200 a year to maintain a horse. Now that's interesting. So I think when Ford went to create his first automobile, he shouldn't have been trying to solve the problem that people wanted to get from point A to point B faster, because that wasn't necessarily their issue. Their issue was that they wanted to have a less expensive yet reliable way to get from point A to point B that didn't require constant maintenance. Oh, so I think you see where I'm going with this. I think that when Ford originally built, in fact, for those of you who didn't know this piece of logic, I'm going to throw out another piece of trivia to you. Here we go. Ford's original company, way back, we're talking 1896, right? He raised $86,000. Now, if you did the math and, try to figure that out, that's about $3.3 million in 2021, okay? So he raised $3.3 million from investors and started something called the Detroit Automobile Company. And that company failed. Oh, wait, what? That company failed. It wasn't until he built the Ford Motoring Company in 1903 that he saw success. And the reason why he failed with the first one is really, really interesting. He failed at the first company because his car that he built, the initial car, or the plans for the car and the way the car was going to be launched, etc., was going to come in right at about $1,000. Now, here's the deal. Cars were still unreliable. They were still slow. There wasn't a lot going on. People were still skeptical about purchasing those things. A horseless carriage, what's going on with that, right? But it was just one of those things where there was a lot to overcome. And what I could tell you is just there wasn't enough cost savings for him to work that equation. It would have never, ever worked out to be something that was affordable. So when Ford Motor Company came about in 1903, he recognized his failures and did some inspect and adapt, and this is the success story. In building the Model T, he got it down to where groups of 2 or 3 men could build the car, and the Model T was a fantastic car. But when the 2 or 3 men worked on it together, it was initially just one person working on it, and then he got the time down with 2 or 3 people from 12 hours to 1.5 hours. And this is where the mentality about assembly line came to be, right? Especially when it came to manufacturing or auto manufacturing. But here's the fun part, the fun fact. The cost of building the Ford Model T then dropped from $850 in 1908 to only $360 in 1927. And I'll tell you what, that's significantly cheaper than feeding any horse, right? I'll tell you that right now. It was just really inexpensive. It worked out. And I think the secret here, the logic here, is that nailing the customer problem is the biggest reason that people hire product managers. So I'm going to say that one more time. Nailing what the customer's problem is the biggest reason people hire project managers or product managers. People don't want a product owner or a product manager who claims to be omnipotent and know everything. Even with tons of years of experience, there's no way you can know all the customer's wants, needs, whims, and desires. You simply can't ignore the customer. You have to make the right impression the first time. So I promised you that I was going to give you some steps to say no gracefully. So if you were in a meeting with your CEO and they were just insistent upon something or asking for something, how do we say no gracefully? So I think there are 5 steps to do this. So I'm going to give you all 5 steps. The first step is to take the information and decide whether the idea that's being proposed is a problem or a solution. So when we have new ideas, it's often that the problem and solutions are jumbled together, right? Like we're trying to mix clay of different colors or whatever the case may be. Our brain is wired to think in a visual way, not conceptually. So it's easier when we can visualize a problem. In this case, they were trying for a faster car, or visualize a solution rather, a faster car, than think about the problem. Affordable personal transport that's reliable. So I think that we missed the mark when we started thinking about the solution. And I think sometimes we are quick to jump to the solution. Now, one of the things that I teach in all my product ownership classes is that the most important thing you can do is understand what the problem is and why we're trying to solve it, right? To make sure it's something that's worth solving. And that brings me to step 2. If we focus on the customer's problem, the actual problem, not solution, and write it down. I know it sounds silly, but if you write it down, you'll be able to see that this is a problem, but is that the real problem or is that a symptom of a bigger problem? And you'll be able to chase it down until you get to the actual problem. So what a lot of people do is they'll put together something like a problem hypothesis. I remember seeing this online. I'm this type of customer. I'm trying to achieve this job or this outcome, but I can't because this problem or barriers are in my way, and this makes me feel a certain way. It gives me an emotional or social problem that I'm trying to solve. And there are tons and tons of places to go and get that template. But for example, I know I live, so I have one home that's in a city several miles southwest of the airport in Utah. And when I try to get an Uber or a Lyft to go to the airport, the problem I run into is that the cars just won't come this far south in the valley to pick someone up to take them to the airport. So oftentimes I have to rely on family or friends or people to drop me off, or I have to find really creative ways to get to the airport. So my problem might be, as someone who lives in a deep southwest end of the valley, I'm trying to find an Uber or a Lyft that'll take me to the airport. But I can't because the drivers continuously refuse my ride when they realize how far out the travel is. And that makes me feel extremely nervous because the last thing I want to do is miss my flight to go home and see my family. Ta-da! So that's a good example, right? But the reason why this template really works is because it captures the functional part of the problem and the emotional part of the problem. And it lets you see things from both sides. So it's a really cool template and something that's good to use. For step 3, I highlight any unknown areas that we have in the problem, and I use that hypothesis statement that I just now stated, and I highlight any unknowns. If we don't know why, right, maybe we can ask some questions. So in my example, I might say, how many people live in the southwest side of the valley? Does it really make sense for them to come out here? When I say I'm trying to get to the airport, is this essential? Is it something that people in our target market do frequently? Good question. If I talk about how unpredictable it is or how hard it is to get someone to come out here, I might say, how is it so that these people don't turn up on time? Or would it be better for me to call a taxi? Would they have the same issue? And then finally, when I talk about how I feel, I most often know this because this is the one that makes sense, or it's most common. But if you can't say that it makes all people feel that way, or it's just your personal problem, sometimes you need to dig a little deeper and figure out what the real problem is. Once again, root cause analysis. Step 4 is to come up with at least 3 to 4 solutions to solve the problem. Now, this is where I say 3 to 4 solutions because I don't want you to have a single threaded solution. This way you have a plan B and perhaps plan C. I think too often we go in and we have wine and cheese parties where I like to whine about the problem, but we never bring any cheese, we never bring any solutions. So it's important for us to figure that piece out. And then finally, step 5, offer to test out the solution with an MVP type model, right? Something that is just very high level framing out of what we're trying to do. Because the truth is, if we spend all of our time building out every feature, we might work for weeks just to realize we built the wrong thing. So we need to make sure we're being visual about what the problem is. We need to make sure that we write down the problem, framing it using like a problem hypothesis statement. We need to make sure we're testing our assumptions, especially the riskiest ones, and make sure we're formulating some qualitative and quantitative data. Then we should come up with 3 to 4 solutions and then offer to test the best solution through an MVP. There you go. That was kind of easy. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and as always, I encourage you to visit AgileDad.com where you can learn more about this topic and many others. And if you have a topic you'd like to hear for an episode of the Daily Stand-Up, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'd love to hear your input. And as always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.